Hello, my friends. And today it's been reported that Zelensky has instructed Defense Minister Fedorov to prepare a war plan for another year. Zelensky ordered Defense Minister Fedorov to develop a plan outlining how Ukraine can effectively continue fighting for another year. The president's office is counting on technological and managerial innovations to help Ukraine achieve certain successes on the battlefield and significantly strengthen its negotiation position. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is insisting on the swift signing of a peace agreement without prolonging the process. The president's office has been given time to think. Otherwise, new tapes will be released. Some high ranking officials prefer a bad peace over serious suspicions from Naboo. Therefore, they are ready to sign almost anything. It's obvious that the war will continue for more than 1 year. Yesterday, Medvedev also stated that the war will continue. The war against Ukraine goes on. Negotiations are good, but our goals will be achieved, Medvedev said. Merz also said that he doesn't believe in the current negotiations. I don't believe in the current negotiations. The war in Ukraine will end only when one of the sides is exhausted, said German Chancellor Merz. In my assessment, this war will end only when one of the two sides is worn down, either military or economically. Reason and humanitarian arguments will not convince Putin. That is the bitter truth. Peskov commented on this statement as well.
I have not seen such statements, but in any case, Europeans are not present at the negotiating table. They are not involved in the negotiation process at all. Moreover, the overwhelming majority of views expressed in European capitals tend to contribute more to the continuation of the war rather than to attempts at a peaceful settlement. Therefore, at this moment, speaking about the participants in the trilateral negotiation format, at least Russia, I would say, does not see any point in the participation of Europeans. It is unlikely to help in any way. The work is ongoing, and as Medinsky said, the work is complicated.
As a result, it's been reported that Putin is continuing mobilization efforts to achieve his goals. Putin is preparing society for a new mobilization, according to ISW. Signs of preparations for a new partial mobilization include laws adopted at the end of last year, allowing the Minister of Defense to tap into a 2 million strong mobilization reserve, as well as the fact that the inflow of contract soldiers is no longer covering battlefield losses. In addition, since November, military enlistment offices in Russia have been conducted year-round conscription, and in December, Putin signed a law authorizing training assemblies for reservists. The previous round of mobilization in September 2022 triggered a sharp wave of public disconnect and led to the departure of an estimated 700,000 to 900,000 people from the country. Putin reportedly fears a repeat of such a scenario, although current recruitment levels of contract soldiers are only sufficient to maintain the army's numbers at a stable level. Of the 300,000 mobilized in 2022, only 78,000 reportedly remained on the front line as of May last year. Last night, information also began to emerge that Belarus is actively issuing draft notices. Men in Belarus are reportedly receiving summonses en masse for military training. Social media has seen a rise in concern, with particular attention to reservists in western regions closer to Europe, Volhynia, and Rivne. Reports claim that call-ups are being issued broadly with little time to prepare, and that even fathers of multiple children or those with young children are being required to report the same day. There are also claims that mobile phones are being taken and communication cut off. Authorities describe the measures as combat readiness checks and a response to what they call aggressive rhetoric from the West. So, overall, it's being portrayed as a gradual preparation for a larger conflict, aimed at expectations that Belarus would align with Russia in the event of further escalation. Now, let's move on to the frontline situation, and each day brings more bad news. Earlier, we were happy that the armed forces of Ukraine were carrying out counteroffensives and liberating villages, but now news is coming in about Russian advances. Today, we'll start with the Liman direction. Here, a Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group entered Svetohirsk and raised their flag. Mhm. Eastern part of Svetohirsk. The Russians carried out a showy action, raising their rack on one of the buildings in the cottage area. In fact, this is not about control but an information move, trying to create the impression of presence where a penetration zone has existed for a long time. This area is not a stable front line. It's a gray zone where the Russians occasionally infiltrate in small groups. Currently, no threatening deployment or signs of consolidation are observed. They enter, display the record video, then either withdraw or stay briefly without fortifying positions. The main infiltration route is through the western part of Yarova. This settlement is also in a partial gray zone, allowing the Russians to maneuver without direct clashes at every step. As long as they don't face a strong response or systematic fire pressure on these approaches, such raids will continue. If the Russians don't feel a threat along their routes, they will try to go deeper, expand zones of presence, and turn one off actions into regular practice. For now, this is not a full scale capture or assault, but demonstrative infiltrations within the gray zone. If entry corridors aren't blocked and logistics aren't disrupted, the intensity of such actions will increase. Additionally, a Russian sabotage group entered the village of Yatskivka, north of Svetohirsk. In this way, Russians are roaming about 8 kilometers from the front line fairly freely, and only local residents see them. Meanwhile, fighting continues in the areas of Zarichne, Stavky, and Drobышevo, and over the past day, there have been no changes on the front line. In the Slovyansk direction, the Russians are breaking through beyond Zakitne, Dronivka, Svyatopokrovsk, assaulting Riznikivka, and advancing toward the areas of Rayolexandrivka and Nikiforivka. This situation is very difficult, but so far over the past day, there have been no major changes. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the Russians are breaking through near Chasiv Yar, assaulting the outskirts of Kostiantynivka, Plashiyivka, Berostok, Ilyinka, Stepanivka, and advancing past Rusin Yar. Activity here is also at its peak, and the Russians are already putting maximum pressure on Kostiantynivka. Over the past 24 hours, there have been no changes, but the situation is catastrophic. In the Dobropillia direction, the Russians have managed to advance significantly. Fighting is ongoing near Ivanivka, the town of Bilitske, and near the village of Sukhetske. As a result, the front here is weakening, and the Russians are gradually pushing the defense toward Dobropillia, albeit very slowly. In the Pokrovsk direction, the advance is even greater. The Russians have pushed 5.5 kilometers toward the village of Shevchenko across the fields. They also advanced 4 kilometers, 400 meters toward Novoalexandrivka. In this way, the encirclement of the village of Horishina is gradually taking shape. Additionally, they managed to advance near Pokrovsk by 2 kilometers 800 meters and are slowly moving closer to Serhiivka. There, the advance is 700 meters and near Novopidgorodny 1 kilometer 200 meters. The situation is worsening again, and it's clear that the high activity of the Russians is not without effect. They are gradually pushing the front forward with costly assaults. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians continue attacks on Filia and Ivanivka, but there have been no changes here. In the direction of Pokrovsk in the Dnipropetrovsk region, the armed forces of Ukraine continue their counteroffensive, but soldiers report that the intensity has already started to decrease. Counterattacks by the defense forces of Ukraine in the Alexandrivka direction are still ongoing. However, it's not the same intensity as before because our resources are very limited. On top of that, the Russians have started pulling in a considerable number of reserves. The window of opportunity is closing, though still slightly open. I believe the timing was used perfectly. There were about 10-14 days before the exhausted Russians could deploy their reserves, and we took advantage of it. I don't expect anything major from now on. Soon the Russians will return to constant attacks across the broad front as it was before. But for future defense, these current counterattacks will be very helpful. The only sad part is that many mistakes were made before, and poor communication caused significant territorial losses. That's why these counterattacks are soaked in the blood of our soldiers. We must always remember the price. In the Huliaipole direction, Russian activity is at its maximum. Battles are ongoing in the areas of Nova Zaporizhia, Dobropillia, and Preluki. The Russians are also advancing near the villages of Verkhnya Tersa and Gierke, Sultan, Sviatoukrainka, and Zaliznichne. There is a high number of shelling here, and the situation continues to worsen. It's clear that the Russians have concentrated a large amount of resources in this area and are trying to push further toward Zaporizhia. Uh, in the Zaporizhia direction itself, the Russians are assaulting Mali Sherbaki, Stepove, and Primorske, but there have been no changes over the past 24 hours. In the Kherson direction, the Russians continue the attacks near Hola Pristan and the Antonivsky Bridge, but no changes have been recorded in the past 24 hours. Now let's move on to the border situation. Here, the Russians are trying to break through near Oleksiivka, but they haven't made any gains, and the situation remains stable. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians continue attacks on the village of Zelene, but the front line remains unchanged. All attacks are being repelled. At the same time, the Russians continue shelling Kharkiv region, and this time they struck near Kozachya Lopань. In the Vovchansk area, The Russians are attacking the village of Vilcha, but they are not able to advance further. For now, the front line remains unchanged. In the direction of Velika Burluk, the Russians are trying to move toward the village of Dovhenka, but the armed forces of Ukraine are successfully repelling all attacks, and there are no changes along the front line. In the Kupiansk direction, activity is low. The Russians are attacking Kuralivka and Novosinovo, but they are unable to advance, and there are no changes over the past 24 hours. In the Borova direction, the Russians are attacking Novoyegorivka and Druzhelyubivka, but activity is minimal here and no changes are observed. Meanwhile, bad news is coming from Poland. They have decided to cancel special laws for Ukrainian refugees. Poland is canceling the special law for Ukrainian refugees, and the new rules for our citizens will take effect on March 5th this year. The law being cancelled simplified rules for staying, employment, receiving social benefits, and access to education for Ukrainians.
We consistently support Ukraine in its fight against Imperial Russia. In the first months of the war, Poland, more than any other country, stood the test of solidarity. But what was justified at that time later began to create feelings of inequality compared to Polish citizens. I promise to end this stage today. The new law fulfills this promise. The new law stops providing emergency assistance and introduces systematic principles. Support is provided, but there are no privileges at the expense of Poles. Benefits will be tied to working in Poland and children completing mandatory school education, like other foreigners. Assistance must be combined with responsibility and contribution to our society.
Also, the European Commission made a very interesting statement, so please listen carefully. Ukraine must protect the rights of gays and lesbians in order to join the European Union, European Commission. The new civil code recognizes a de facto family union only for a man and a woman. This means same sex couples cannot receive legal recognition of their partnership. They do not have rights to inheritance, joint property, social or tax benefits as spouses. The European Commission stated that Ukraine must protect the rights of same sex couples and ensure equality and dignity for all people. Therefore, allowing same sex marriages is required for European Union accession. Friends, be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. It's very interesting to hear your opinion. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.